Hey team, picking up from where we left off last week, we're continuing on with our room setup. So hopefully you'll manage to get your room built if you didn't get to do it in class. Hopefully you've brought that in and you're ready to work off it. If you're not, it's alright, there's another file up on Canvas that you can use for the in-between. So this is what we should be working with, something kind of like this. So split up the environment layers back into the distance. Our room is its own individual comp here, and then I've got the chairs set up in there too as two separate little compositions on their own. So our layer stack's pretty small, which is nice. So I'll jump back to my active camera so I can see how it's all framed. Cool. So today we're going to look at making this look more convincing. At the moment it's very flat. We want to bring some lights in so it actually, these chairs cast shadows and we can get a little bit of more convincing lighting happening in the room. So what we're going to do is, first off, it's really important to be aware as soon as you start making things 3D, you start working with lights and cameras, it gets really chuggy on your machines. So we'll see how far we can get. There's a few little workarounds that I've developed that we can get similar results without complicating it too much. So I'll go through that later on. But absolutely have to change this down from full resolution to quarter. So it's already going to look a little bit pixelated. Don't worry, that's not how it's going to render. This is just for our preview, because it's going to get too tedious to wait for this to preview while we're setting up our scene. So we're going to switch that down to quarter. And then what we're going to do is we are going to create a new layer. So first thing, we're going to bring in our lights. So we're going to go up to Layer, New, scrub on over to Lights. Ta-da! Now this is our light setup panel. Whatever we choose here can be adjusted later. So if you set up something and go, nah, I want to change it, that's cool. You're not stuck with what you've got. But first thing we're going to create is a light, an overall light to set our scene. So something that's an ambient light in the room, conveniently titled is a light called ambient. So we're going to work with that one for now. It's also a point light, which emits light from a single point in space in all directions. A spotlight is exactly as you'd imagine it, so like you see in the theatre. And a parallel light it's kind of like a point light, but it has a direction. So we're going to work with ambient. For now, we're going to call it ambient. Very complicated title. And then the color, we're going to go and change that. So I'm going to set that just to white for now. We can change that later if we like. Cool, and we'll leave the intensity at 60. I've already been poking around with this, so my settings are all probably different to yours. So 660 will be great for now. We'll see how that looks. Then hit OK. And you see our room darkens. Now, that seems counterintuitive. It's going to darken our scene now that we've added a light. But imagine before this, it is consistently lighting it as if it is at 100% ambient light. So if I drop this down, the intensity to 100, you can see that is it is identical. So the default lighting in After Effects is an ambient light set to 100 intensity on white. If we change this down to 60, that means then we go and add our extra lights. It's not going to blow out and get really white and spotty. So we'll leave that at 60 for now. And then we're going to go in and we're going to add a new light. And this time we're going to use a point light. Now this is going to be the lights in our ceiling. So I'm going to call this ceiling. I can't spell. Get a capital C because formal. Now I'll leave it. Okay, and then in this case, color, we'll leave that at white as well. Intensity, I'm going to drop that down because I'm going to have a couple. So I'm going to make that 30. Now, you can see these options are now available, which they aren't when you have ambient. They're all shaded out. So now that I'm on point, I can access these different options. So I change that, the fall off here. By default, yours will probably show none. So we want to change that to inverse square clamped. It's also smooth. I can show what the difference is, but basically this kind of gives a more convincing shadow, given the room that we've got. Smooth is more like an overall glow, like something that you have outside that's not bouncing off things. So inverse square clamped. Radius, I'm going to set that to 500 just because I like clean numbers. Now, this cast shadow, make sure that is ticked. We definitely want to cast shadows, otherwise we ain't going to see nothing. Because it is going to be a daytime scene as well, we want this shadow to be diffused slightly. So I'm going to make that 50 pixels. So what that means is it kind of blurs those shadows, so it's not like harsh, clean lines. And our shadow darkness, we can leave that at 100% for now. We hit OK. Cool. So we can see turning the eye on and off. That is looking a bit brighter in our room. So I can drag this around and kind of get it in the ceiling kind of area. Alright. Now one thing we need to do before we're actually going to see these shadows working, because at the moment we've set cast shadows, but there's no shadows actually being cast by our objects. They're being lit differently, but they're not casting shadows as such. So that is actually a material setting we need to set on all of our individual layers. So whenever you make something 3D, I'll grab my sky for example and twirl it down, there's this tab that pops up which says material options. If I turn it back to 2D, there is no tab there. So it's only available on 3D layers. So I'm going to tab down material options, and you can see you get all these additional settings to do with lighting and how it reacts. So at the moment, cast shadows is turned off. So we want to turn that on. Now we're not going to see a difference because I started with my sky and there's nothing for it to cast a shadow on. But this is what we need to do to all of our layers. We don't want to do it with the sun because it's the sun. The sun is probably not going to cast a shadow. But the clouds and the hills, they are all going to do that. If we have them all selected when we tick this box, they'll do them all together. So cast shadows turned on. Great. Now we also need to do it onto our room and chair assets. So if we jump inside the room, grab those layers and twirl down, turn on the shadows, and do the same for the chair. So you need to do it for the individual layers in here. A little bit tedious, and it is going to slow down our machines again as well. That's why it's automatically ticked off, to speed up the whole rendering process. But this is all to make stuff look cool. Oops. Back to our scene one. Great. So now if we have our ceiling off and on, you can see there's a little bit of shadow here. It's being cast by that chair. I might actually pump up the intensity of this so you can see it a bit clearer. Look at that. Look at that shadow. Now don't worry about this. That is just because we're previewing on quarter. If we jump to full, it's going to take a while. Oh my gosh. And this is why we use light sparingly. And same with 3D. You don't want to overdo it because it gets pretty tough. Cool. This is nice little shadows. A bit of shadow cast from my window because I pushed that away. A bit from my rug as well. Great. Pop that back down to quarter. and I'm gonna set this ceiling intensity to be 60. Alright, I'm gonna move it back in space a bit. Oop, too far. Sorry guys. Paying attention. Put that up here-ish. Okay. I want to make a second light as well. So I'm just going to do 2 in between these, just for the sake of being more efficient. And I think that's all we'll need to get the same kind of feel. Whoop. So just duplicating that layer with Control or Command D. And then you can see you get this kind of double shadow, which is kind of that more realistic looking shadow that you'll see when you've got multiple lights in a space. Cool. That looks great. Ceiling 2, I'm just going to get rid of the 2. Now, that looks cool in the room, because at the moment outside looks a little bit dreary. So we're going to go up to Layer, New Light, make a new Ambient Light, which is this guy. So this is just going to be our big light that's emits from, actually no, we're going to make a point light. So it's emitting from that one point, which is our sun. We'll leave our intensity at 70, see how that is. We're going to have the fall off set to smooth this time. And we'll leave that radius at about 1000. We'll see how that works. Make changes later, and we'll make sure cast shadows is ticked, but in this case, because it's outside and we don't want the shadows to be too harsh, I'm going to make the shadow darkness 50% rather than the default 100. Cool. If we hit OK, a bit blurry. Cool, so I'm going to chuck this near the sun asset, because it is the sunlight. So grab that and move it back. I'm gonna plonk it behind the sun. I might just temporarily hide my room so I can see what the sun is in my front view. Yeah, cool. Now don't panic that everything's looking a bit dark now. We're going to fix that too. Sweet. Yeah. Alright, turn my room back on. Fabulous. Okay, so if I turn that off and on, how's that looking? Cool, so it's lighting up my sky, that looks heaps better. It's not doing much to my room though. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to twirl down the settings, my light options. And I'm going to try, I'll show you what fall off none looks like. That's probably what we want for the sun, because we don't want it to have an end point. So turn that off and on, you can see it's actually making a difference to the internals of our room as well. Cool. Now, what we need to change here is that our sun is looking dark. Now, it's not casting any shadows, because we've already left that off, but it also isn't emitting light. So what we're going to do is we're going to twirl down our sun, our material options. Our ambient is set at 100, so it's the default color. What we also want to do is set the light transmission, so light can shine through it. Wow. Maybe 100 is a bit much, make that 80. So we've still got a bit of contrast with the background. There we go. We're going to do the same with our clouds as well. So clouds, material options, our light transmission, we'll make that like 60. We want them to be less than the sun because they're a bit denser and they're not the thing emitting light. Just letting the light shine through. Is that on the left one as well? Light transmission, what did I say, 60? Cool. Alrighty, looking good. Kind of cool. So now we've got our little room set up. We can tweak those little settings if we want to as well. So maybe if we want the ceiling lights to be a bit more aggressive, we can make them 80. Could give them a softer color. Yeah, so I don't want to go too soft because it ends up, too coloured because it ends up washing everything out. Actually, I'm going to just eyedropper this colour so they match. And then I'm going to drop down my ambient because I'm finding that a little bit too flat at the moment. Maybe 40. That looks better. That's nice. Cool. Sweet. So there's the scene. Now this little light shining up on the ceiling, that's from our sun outside, which is lovely. I might want to move my little ceiling lights so they're in place a bit better. There we go. So if you move it back a bit so you can actually see the shine on the ceiling, that's how you know where it is. I'm going to line it up with the light hole. So I'm not going to put it right on the ceiling because then you tend to get big nasty looking shadows. I can do that and show you what I mean. So if I drag it up, oops, missed. Drag them up. Kind of, whoop, too far. It's on the other side of the ceiling. You don't end up with the lit ceiling, it's kind of black. So I'm just moving it away a little bit. So it's got enough space for the light to actually bounce off the ceiling. Okay, cool. Now you can play around with the settings and make your scene look very different if you lag. I'm going to save this and I'll show you another one that I was messing around with. So there's nothing tricksy or there's no new assets in this scene. But what I've done is created a night scene. Needs a camera that we're deleting. Spoilers of what's about to happen. Cool, so this is a night scene that is all the same assets. A couple of ceiling lights. I've added a night light, so it casts a blue light on everything. You know what? Don't need it. Don't need it at all. Delete. In this case, exactly the same as the previous scene. So I've got an ambient light, ceiling light, and the moon. And just changed their properties. So my ambient light, because it's kind of inside, I'm just thinking kind of like a little lamp light. So I've gone for a much warmer light. The intensity is very low. I've still got ceiling lights in here, using a 50% intensity. Everything else is pretty much the same. Radius is a bit different, but same. And the colour's a little bit warmer. And then my moonlight, intensity is 20, so it's really low. The little soft colour there. I also added, where am I? The moon. So I've added another effect to this. So I've added a layer style. I gave it a colour overlay, so it was no longer yellow. So it's now white. And then an outer glow as well. Just to add a little bit of something. Which we could totally do to our sun scene as well. But yeah, so you can get lots of different lighting effects just with those simple lights. So ambient and point are the key ones you'll use. Parallels have their place, but I always find them a bit more faffy than they need to be. Good if you need to have a light following something and you don't want it to be a spotlight, you want to have a bit more of a soft edge. But yeah, ambient and point are going to be your best buds. So save that. Open up the previous file. Right. Cool. So next thing we can do is we can add some cameras. So this is a fully functioning 3D scene where the shadows are dynamic. They will update as our objects move. I'll do this one so you can see it clearer. Boop. Amazing. And it is casting direct shadows on everything. Now, what we want to be able to do is move around it. We don't want to just be stuck in this one view. So what you can do is you can add cameras. There's lots of benefits to cameras. There's lots of negatives to cameras. Cameras, if you find this is getting chuggy, it's going to get really, really slow. But I'll show you how you can set it up, and then we can decide whether we do that or not on your specific projects. So layer, new, and missed layer, new, a camera. Now again, you can change this as much as you like before or after you make it. So just call this cam. Preset, we're going to set that to 50 millimeters. Now 50 millimeters is the same as the default of our framing. These are, the smaller you go, the more distorted you get, the more depth. So kind of macro-y. I think that's the right direction. Yeah. Anyway, so 50 mil is what we want. You get more perspective the other way, is what I mean. We're going to lock the zoom, leave that as it is. Millimeters, great. Measure film size horizontally, blah, blah, blah. Cool. Okay. Sweet. Now nothing changed, which is perfect. So if we had this camera set at, can you change it here? No. So if we made that again, so layer, new camera, and we change the preset to 35, we'll make it more obvious, 20 mil, you see you get a lot more distortion in your camera. So that's why we set it at the preset of 50. New add camera. So it is exactly what we've been working with. We don't break what we've already created. Okay, cool. Now, I would highly recommend you never animate with the camera. There's position and scale and rotation and all that kind of normal transforms. But it's pivoting from a different point. So if we jump to our custom view, you can see this is where our axis point is. If we rotate around there, we're going to be moving not where our actual focus point is. It's really faffy to work with, so just don't work with your camera for your position action. So we're going to go from custom view 1, rather than back to active camera, we're going to go to cam. So we can see exactly what we're seeing. It should be exactly the same, shouldn't see a change, but good to be aware of it, that you are in the correct view, because sometimes you'll go and animate the camera and why isn't it working? You're not in the right view. Okay, so we've made our camera, we haven't done anything to it. We're going to go make a new null. That is how we're going to animate our camera. So layer, new null object. I like to set my anchor points in the center, so Control Alt Home or Command Alt Function Home, the shortcut on Apple. I'm going to go to Window and Align, so I can set it to the center of my frame. Close that. Cool. I'm going to call this Cam Control. Sweet. Now, at the moment, the camera is a 3D object. There is no tick box, it just automatically is. Same with lights. And my cam control is 2D. So I need to make sure this is 3D, tick in that little box. And then I can parent my camera to my cam control. And now it is safe to move We're not going to break anything, and everything should work. So if I rotate on my Y, amazing. Nice and straightforward. Cool. So now if I wanted to do a little bit of a zoom, I'd animate my position from here to here. So if this is where I want it to end, the very, very start, gonna zoom in. So you can use, while it's taking ages to preview, you can use your bounding boxes as your guide to how you're framing it. Very handy. Oops. Get a little bit of rotation on there as well, perhaps. So on my Y. I think I went the wrong way, did I? It's hard to tell when it's being so laggy. And then track across. Wrong way. So that's the other thing to remember. Your null looks like it's not moving at all. It's not supposed to. It's moving the camera, and it's basically making the world move around it. So your null isn't going to look like it's moving because you're sitting in your camera view. Okay, so if I scrub through that, we're doing like a little bit of a zoom out and a rotate up. It's cool. If I play it, it's going to take ages. Now this, what we're doing here, could just be done with the null. You don't need the camera at all to get these actions. But the cool thing about cameras, we twirl down our settings here. Beyond our basic transforms, we've got all these camera options. So we've got additional zoom, which is rather than just the position, so it's not just moving your null in and out. We've also got this awesome thing called depth of field. This is going to potentially crash your machine, so everybody save what you're doing. So Control S, give yourself a save. It's probably going to break. If we turn it on, what it means is, by default it's set pretty broad so you can't see much. But if I drop my focus distance, so my depth of field is based on where the camera is focused. So my zoom is set at the same as my focus distance. So if I drop that down to 600, I'm just picking a number, I'm not sure. So you see you can get the blur happening. Drop it down further so you can focus on things close up. Yeah, so you can get things, so you're going to have a lot of things built up in space, and you'd only be able to see those things that were exactly at the focus distance you had. And scrub it through until I get close to my chair. I think it'll be around the 150 maybe. Let's see if we put that on 4. So chuggy. Cool. There we go. So you can see that's nice and crisp. Now that means this scene is in focus, but because my aperture is so high, I think, I always forget which direction, it's all pretty crisp. So if I want these mountains to be in the blurs, right, so did it wrong. It is the higher the number, the more the focus, so you can see that your mountains are now blurred. Your little rug is a bit blurred as well, so it's kind of just focusing in on our smallest area. Make my aperture, whoa, big. Let's see what happens. Woo, look at that. So only focusing in on our backs of our chairs. So you can get a very macro looking lens happening here. Now you'll notice how long that took to preview. Freaking ages. So it gets real chuggy, real fast. If I go to scrub through, it's going to take just as long. So every single stage of this is going to take that long to preview. So imagine how long it would take to render. So if you're going to employ this method, be ready to render the day before submission. I'm not joking, I'm not being over dramatic, because you want to have a day to or have a good few hours to render it, discover that you've missed something, and go back and re-render. You just need to have that much buffer time because you're not going to see things doing things on quarter preview. So you need to do a test render at full res, and then you'll see how many things have not worked the way you expected them to. And it's not something that comes with practice, that you don't stuff it up on each render. It happens on every first render. There's always something. Cool, so that looks funky, but there is no way that I could be bothered dealing with that. So that's cool. Cameras are great. They cause lots of problems though. So I'm going to turn my depth of field off. That's going to speed everything up a trillion T. Dun, 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 dun. It's still on full though, so that's going to still be chuggier than it needs to. I want to make sure you guys know how to use cameras. I actively avoid them because they slow down everything. I just don't find that I need them. I'm very rarely using depth of field. If I am, it's just for one little element. Or you're doing something in 3D, so you do it in Cinema or Maya instead. So think about what you're doing and whether you actually need it. If you do need it, set it up, make it look right, and then turn it off while you're working, and then you can just do it for your renders and your tests. That'll make life manageable for you. You've also got loads of other settings that you can mess around with too, but it's the depth of field that is the fancy one, let's be real. Okay, so that's one way we could do it. We can get our camera moves happening. So we've got our, switch that down to quarter because that's going to take too long. So we can see our camera actions. Now the other option we could do is cut out the cameraman entirely. I'm going to make a copy of this scene, so just so I can show you the difference. So I'm going to Control D. I'm going to delete these two dudes, and I'm going to make a new null. So this is another way you could set it up instead of using a camera. Window, line. I'd highly recommend, if you guys get into doing some more motion graphicsy stuff, that you get two screens, because it is real tedious having your timelines on the same screen. Cam. Control. Make it 3D. And this time, rather than parenting the camera to this and moving the camera around the space, we're going to parent the space to the null. And we're going to move the entire space around the camera. Cool. So again, position and rotation. Da da da, da da da. Get the start of our timeline. This time we'll go backwards because we're moving the world towards the active camera. Oh, too far, pay attention. See how that goes. So exactly the same deal, but you've got one less layer, one less thing to potentially stuff you up. And you can get the same effect. So you don't have the depth of field, but you've got the same amount of control. So depending on your project, how you've set it up, what you need to do, you'll have to decide which way you go. Be ready for the render time in either option. As soon as you make things 3D, start working with cameras and lights and all that kind of stuff, it slows it down a lot. My little laptop is not particularly happy being unplugged and unsupported, and anyway, but it's getting through it, so cool. If you did want to do it this way and you wanted to add in a motion, like a tilt shift blur, what you can do, make a new layer, new adjustment, because generally what you're doing the blur for is kind of that come in momentary focus. So you can just chuck in an adjustment layer with a blur on it. So go to my effects, window and effects and presets. Fast blur. No, not fast blue, fast blur. Now with the adjustment layer selected, chuck that on. Then you've got this blurriness level that you can animate. Make that, start it, and you can see that. You can do like that camera focus. It's over blurring, under blurring, over blurring, under blurring, that kind of thing. Just keyframe and adjustment layer. I find that way more versatile and far less technically faffy than using a camera. It's entirely up to you guys how you guys approach it, and it all depends on your specific project. But yeah, it's part of the challenge, is deciding which direction to go. It's kind of cool. Now if we did this with the camera, twirl that down, camera options, change that back to, what was it before, 25? 1.5 seconds, will animate the same thing. Animate the focus distance. So it's going from out of focus to in focus. So this was 400 and it was blurry, I think. From memory, turn that on. And then if we play that, so that also works. So this is more literal to an actual camera getting in focus. The other one's faking it, just chucking a blur over everything. So this would be, you'd actually see things in the distance coming into focus as you're transitioning. So this will get a more convincing and realistic look. So you can see those, I'm pointing at my screen, but you can't see where I'm pointing. See these hills and mountains and stuff coming into focus at a different rate. Whereas this, it's all one thing. So it depends on how authentic you want to be. And all in all, these are kind of previewing at the same kind of rate. They're both taking ages. Yeah. Generally overall though, I'd find the setup like this would render faster. Just as a hot tip. But both are totally valid. This is more legit. This is a hack that also works. Cool, but that's about it today. So feel free to keep playing around with your lights, see if you can get some different looks happening in there. Change it to nighttime or daytime. And yeah, keep working on your projects. Good work, guys.